Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Afghans in Pakistan are being forced to return.
Pakistan says it will begin deporting hundreds of thousands of Afghans next week after a deadline for them to leave the country expired on Monday.
What does it mean for critics of the Afghan government to return home? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. This year, Afghans in Pakistan didn't celebrate the end of Ramadan. They held their breath. While others celebrated Eid al-Fitr by visiting loved ones, many families braced for a knock at the door. Afghans have sought refuge in Pakistan for decades, starting with the wars of the 1970s and 80s. When the Taliban returned to power in 2021, a new wave of activists, journalists, and former officials were amongst those who fled. But now they are being told to leave. Amongst those now facing deportation are 60 women's rights activists, including Humaira Alim.
I recently had a harrowing experience with the police here in Pakistan. On February 7th, my visa had expired and I was waiting for an extension when the policeman came to our home, despite my attempts to explain that I was in the process of securing my new visa.
Humaira worked as a women's rights activist in Afghanistan before the Taliban came back to power in 2021.
They insisted on taking me and my family to a deportation center. I was terrified, shaking and crying, pleading with them not to deport us, knowing well the fate that awaited us in Afghanistan. My heart shattered as I had to bribe the police just to secure our release. The situation escalated to the point where I had to lock the doors and hide with my children on the rooftop for hours without water or food and their milk.
Human rights groups like Amnesty International are calling to stop the deportations from Pakistan. My guest today has been fighting to get the international community's support for those activists before it's too late.
My name is Liliana Harrington. I am a senior campaigner at the global civic nonprofit Avaaz. We try to act as the global civic voice of the world in many areas. And this is why we're working on this particular campaign about Afghan women in Pakistan.
Liliana, right now there are hundreds of thousands of Afghans in Pakistan who are facing deportation. Now, it's going to be a huge disruption for all of them if they're deported, but for a select group, it's far more dangerous than that. We're talking about a small number of activists. Now, these are people who have been advocating for women's rights in Afghanistan. They face removal too, and you've been speaking with them directly. Tell us about them.
So we are working directly with a group of 60 women's rights activists. There are 55 women and 5 men who spoke out against the Taliban's policies of gender apartheid, and they have had to flee to Pakistan to safety after the Taliban took power in 2021. They are now in hiding in Pakistan from the Pakistani police, who are carrying out increasingly violent raids and harassment against all Afghans. For this particular group, they fear death if they go back. So this is a group where 2/3 have already been imprisoned, tortured, or raped by the Taliban. They fear that happening again if they go back. Some of them have gotten written threats from the Taliban intelligence services telling them to cease their activism. They've had their families targeted. And for that reason, some of them have had to flee alone. So we have heard again and again from these activists, I can't go back. I fear that I will be killed. I think the scary part is that they don't know exactly what will happen. One of the most inspiring stories is of a woman who was injured in a blast in Kabul and had her leg amputated. She then rebuilt her life and joined the Afghan women's wheelchair basketball team. And she played with them for years. When the Taliban came to power, that was shut down. Many of her teammates left, but she chose not to at that point. She chose to stay and to organize and to take part in protests for women's rights as the Taliban was stripping women's rights away in an attempt to resist this and defend, the lives that women had built before the Taliban came to power. She was taken from a protest and tortured by the Taliban. Her eardrum was ruptured, and they also started targeting her family. So she's actually one of the women who had to flee alone to Pakistan, and is now in Pakistan without a male protector, trying to avoid these raids. There's also, one of the women was a journalist who also did women's classes and capacity building work. She was taken from her job teaching sewing to around 100 women, and taken by the Taliban, taken into custody. Does not like to talk about what happened to her there. There were 2 sisters who helped organize protests and had their family targeted. One of them was taken into custody. There's a major women's rights organizer who had to flee and now has her name and her photo posted around checkpoints at the Afghan border so that they know when she comes back.
Tell me a little bit about what life is like for them in hiding. Are they finding ways to survive? Are they keeping on the move? What does this look like at the moment?
Yes, so it depends. It's a group of 60, so it varies a bit between them. Most of them are based in and around Islamabad, where the raids are the most intense. Some of them have tried to flee in recent days because the raids are intensifying. It's most difficult for a woman without male protectors. That makes them less safe. So we've had women who have had to go from abandoned house to abandoned house with their children, attempting to stay away from the Pakistani police. Just this morning before I joined, we got news that raids are happening. We thought they would be delayed until April 10th, but it turns out they're still going on. And we had a woman who was trying to escape on her roof to get to her Pakistani friend's house because the Pakistani police have been identifying where Afghans are staying and raiding and searching their houses. So it's a very insecure situation. And we're in the process of trying to find safe houses because it's simply not safe for these activists to stay in the houses where they've been hiding.
And what would happen if the Pakistani police arrested them? Would they be taken to a detention center? How long would they have before they're just driven across the border, I assume?
So that's a little bit unclear, and the Pakistani government has not been forthcoming about this plan. They've made sort of short, opaque announcements, and then there have been low-level or high-level raids going on. We have had one woman who was already arrested and taken to a detention center with her child and was forced to bribe the police to escape that detention center. So the Pakistani government has said that they will either move people from Islamabad, the capital city, and Rawalpindi, the neighboring city, or they will deport them straight back to Afghanistan. And it's not clear exactly why you would be sent one place or another.
Yeah. Do the Pakistani authorities know that they consider this a death sentence if they're moved across the border?
Yes. So we've sent a letter directly to the Pakistani government explaining this situation. It's also been raised by Amnesty International, by Human Rights Watch, by the UN Agency for Refugees. So the Pakistani government is definitely aware that for many Afghans in Pakistan, this is a death sentence.
Is there anywhere for them to even go? I mean, have they been so targeted by the Taliban that their houses have been destroyed, that their families have been targeted as well? I mean, even if they did go back, is there a home to return to?
Yes. So in some cases, there is a home to return to. In other cases, as you said, their families have been targeted, so they don't want to return to the family home and have their family targeted as well.
More with Liliana after the break. So Liliana, Pakistani officials say this is about undocumented migrants and security concerns. In an interview with Al Jazeera, Minister of State for Interior Talal Chowdhury said, "We have hosted Afghans in the country for decades, showing our hospitality and generosity, but it cannot continue indefinitely. They will have to return." Why is this push to deport them happening now?
hmm So, as you said, the Pakistani state claims that it's security concerns. There's the TTP, which is a Taliban aligned group in Pakistan that has targeted Pakistani security forces and has carried out suicide bombings. So this whole deportation drive started in 2023 when those security concerns were becoming more apparent. However, I think we can agree that it's not the women's rights activists that are causing security concerns. They're fleeing from
Yeah.
security concerns themselves. Pakistan has also undergone an economic crisis over the past few years. So there's an element of, scapegoating and also valid economic concern from the Pakistani government. They've had huge floods that have taken a lot of money and caused financial strain.
There are certain steps people can do to avoid this deportation immediately, but they're very difficult and time consuming. And they've already pushed back this deadline to deport everyone by at least a week. Are there any green shoots there that people might be able to stay?
Right now, we don't see the Pakistani government backing off long term. So you can get a no objection certificate, which allows you to stay, supposedly. We haven't talked to anyone who has gotten that certificate, which means that the people who have come after the fall of the Taliban are on visas. You used to be able to get a visa for 6 months and extend your visa. Now that period has been reduced to 1 month. So it's usually a lengthy process, which costs money that many people don't have, especially if there's a bribe involved. So you're in a situation where every month you have to go through this process and pay this money to renew your visa to stay in the country legally. And this has led to many people being, undocumented, according to the Pakistani government.
Liliana, this seems like a really big reverse course for Pakistan. I wonder how this deportation agenda is playing domestically there.
Yes, so the government is certainly trying to stoke anti-Afghan sentiment, but what we've seen is that it's not universal. Our petition has over 400,000 signatures from our members around the world and in Pakistan, and we've received dozens of messages from our Pakistani members calling Afghan people their brothers, asking the prime minister and the minister of the interior to stop these deportations and to treat Afghans with compassion for what they've been through. I think it's important to remember that Pakistan has been hosting Afghan refugees at scale for more than 40 years. So they've lived alongside Pakistanis. They've started businesses. They work. They intermarry. So I think it's important to underline that while the government is certainly pushing this narrative that Afghans should leave, it's not necessarily what all Pakistani people are feeling. And we are really urging the Pakistani government to continue the legacy of generosity and compassion that they've had towards Afghans in the past.
So, okay, so just to sum up and make sure that I have this right, you have hundreds of thousands of Afghans who are living in Pakistan who are potentially affected by this broader order. You've been talking to these 60 people that are these activists. The reason that Pakistan is making this move right now is because of a variety of concerns. One is that economic conditions aren't great, and they're a convenient scapegoat. There's also security concerns with Taliban fighting on the borders. But what does this mean for the Taliban? They're going to be forced to absorb hundreds of thousands of new people into the country. I mean, no country could handle that, really. But for the Taliban, whose economy is crippled, this could be hugely disruptive.
Yes. So great point. Afghanistan is probably among one of the countries least equipped to absorb any migrants. There are, I think, 182 out of 193 countries on the Human Development Index, which measures, quality of living and, the basic human needs. They are in a humanitarian crisis where over half the population is in need of humanitarian assistance. And the U.S., which provides 40% of its aid, has just paused aid, as far as we know. So they're really not capable of absorbing these additional. There are around 3 million Afghans in Pakistan, which the Pakistani government has said they want to expel by the end of the year. And the Taliban government in Afghanistan is in no condition to accept those people.
Wow. Okay. So the question for the world becomes, why can't anyone take them in? Right? And it reminds me of a memory from February. U.S. President Donald Trump was having a press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when an Afghan journalist, Nazira Karimi, asked Trump about his plans for Afghanistan under Taliban rule.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Afghan suffered women as I expectation from you. Do you have any plan to change Afghanistan situation? Are you able to recognize Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist, Afghan suffered women. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your future plan for Afghan people, especially Afghanistan?
I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? Oh. Actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck, live in peace. Go ahead, please.
Trump has a history of mocking reporters' accents, but it's also just so clarifying about just how on the back burner Afghanistan is, especially since former President Joe Biden withdrew troops back in 2021. The U.S., as you said, halted aid and has since suspended key refugee admissions, which is probably not a huge surprise given Donald Trump's stance on immigration. But we should be clear, it's not just the U.S. Canada, for example, stopped resettling Afghans after reaching its limit. Germany has resumed deportations. I mean, how can these governments turn their backs on the very women they once vowed to protect?
That's a great question. And I think the clip you played really demonstrates how the West has turned their backs and broken their promises to the Afghan people. I think we remember in 2021 when the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, there was a huge outpouring of global support. There were promises to take in the Afghan people. There were refugee programs created because Western governments seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and what these people would experience if they were condemned to stay in Afghanistan after they had, worked with Western governments or engaged in activism, or in some cases just, cooperated with international rights groups like Avaaz or Amnesty or others. And what we're seeing now is Western countries trying to escape responsibility for a massive crisis that they helped fuel, especially with this very messy withdrawal. So yes, the U.S. pausing aid is a huge blow. They took in a huge number of Afghans, and they have, I think, around 20,000 more that are ready to come to the U.S. and instead are stuck in Pakistan. But it's not just the U.S., as you said. For example, Germany announced just in 2022 that they would take in 1,000 Afghans a month who are at risk. So these are people like the group of activists we're working with, as well as educators, journalists, artists who face persecution under the Taliban. And they are now canceling the program, according to the new coalition government. So That's a broken promise. You mentioned Canada. There's also Australia, which has announced for some reason will take up to 6 years to process Afghan refugee applications now. The Netherlands, which has rejected women's asylum applications from Afghanistan. So it is simply a case of these countries seeing it as not their problem anymore, even as conditions get worse in Afghanistan, and even as these refugees face increasing harassment in Pakistan.
So are there any Hail Mary countries that might come out of left field and maybe take some of these people?
So we're certainly trying our best. The country that has been most cooperative so far is Brazil, who really didn't have a role in the crisis, but is trying to live up to their basic humanitarian obligations and respond to the urgency of the situation. So we're working with a resettlement agency in Brazil that is open to resettling this group of activists.
Okay. Is there anything that people listening or watching this can do to help?
Yes. So Avaaz has started a petition. Petitions help us understand what people care about so we can direct our efforts on what to work on. So you can sign that petition. Our partners, Food for Thought Afghanistan, they're a small group helping this group of women and also other grassroots movements in Afghanistan, have started an emergency fundraiser because we are trying to get these women resettled in Brazil, which has proven to be the most open to accepting them. And we are fundraising because they need to fund flights out of Pakistan to Brazil and also their resettlement costs, and making sure they have the documentation needed. This is one of the crazy things, is that we're a little bit worried about some of them having the documentation to get out of the country, because Pakistan has made it so difficult for some people to get visas that some of them can't even get visas that would allow them to leave and be resettled elsewhere. So again, just speaking to the impossibility of the situation they find themselves in.
Okay. Liliana, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
And that's The Take. We're always listening to what you think of the show, so let us know what kind of episodes you'd like to hear more of and what you thought of this one. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. We'll be back.